Hello everyone, and in this video we're gonna build a horizontal scroll using React.js, Tailwind CSS and Framer Motion. So let's open our terminal and type the following command: npm create feed at latest, and I also write dot in the end so that everything will be created exactly inside this folder without any other folders. So here let's choose React, then JavaScript. Now let's write npm install. Now we need to install Framer Motion, so let's say npm install Framer Motion. Now it's time to connect Tailwind CSS to our project, so let's visit the official website of Tailwind CSS. Here we need to click Get Started. Then we need to copy this line and paste it in our terminal. Now we need to copy this line and put it inside vid.config.js file. And now right next to React, I need to write Tailwind CSS. So let's save it. Now we need to add this import to our file. We can add it inside index.css by removing this unnecessary code and pasting this import. So let's save it. Now we can say npm run dev. So we can delete some unnecessary files and lines of code. So let's delete this app.css. And inside app.jsx, we can also delete all these lines and this boilerplate code as well. So let's just copy this text and we can come inside this index.html and write it here. So I really like doing it when I make a video about something. So let's save it. Now I will split my screen so that you'll be able to see everything that's going on the screen. So as you can see, here it is, React horizontal scroll, thanks to the fact that we wrote it here inside this title. Okay. Now I'm going to create a separate component called horizontal scroll. For that, inside this source folder, I'm going to create a new folder called components. And here I'm going to create a horizontal scroll component. So let's import it inside this app.jsx. So let's delete this text. So here it is. So we need some data to work with. For that, inside this source folder, I'm going to create a new file called data.jsx. And I'm going to paste here some data that I have already prepared. So as you can see, I have this cards array, and each object inside this array has its own title, description, image URL, project URL, and background color. You can get access to this data on my GitHub repository. The link will be in the description. Or if you have some time, you can create your own data and work with it. So let's import this data inside this horizontal scroll component. Okay, and now I can display those data on this page. So let's do it. For that, I will say cards dot map cards and index. And to control the layout even better, I can create a separate component for a card. So let's do it. So inside these components, I'm going to create a new component called card.jsx. Okay. So now here we can say card And here we need to pass down some values. But first of all, we need to write key, and for each child a key should be unique, and in this case index is always unique, so we can write key will be equal to this index. We can also pass down all the card values by writing this kind of syntax, spreading all the data and passing it to this card component. So let's save it. And as you can see, here we have 5 cards. Now let's add some styles, but before I need to create one more div. So for this div, which contains this div of cards, I'm gonna add the following styles. I'm gonna say min height will be screen, width will be screen. Now let's say that it will be flex direction will be column, and let's say that it will be justify center. So as you can see, now our cards on center vertically. And now if I say items center, they will be right here. Okay, and for this div, we can add the following styles. We can say that it will be flex, width will be screen, height will be screen. And again, they are in this top left corner. Okay, now let's style a card itself. But before, we need to get access to all those properties like title, description, and so on. So let's say that it will be title, description, and so on. Image URL, project URL, and background color. Okay. Now inside this card, I can write an image tag, and for the source, I can write image URL, and for the alternative option, I can write title. So let's save it. As you can see, our images right here. Now let's create a div, and inside I'm gonna create h2 tag, and here I will write title. Now let's create a p tag for description. And we also need to create a tag for our URL. Here we can write view project, and for href we can write project URL, but in reality it doesn't lead anywhere. So let's save it, and here it is. Now let's style this card component. So to this div, let's say the following. We need to write curly braces and backsticks because our background color will be different for each card. Okay. So now let's say for each card that width will be screen, height will be screen, flex, and flex direction will be column. Let's also say that items will be center and justify will be center. So let's save it. And as you can see, we have all 5 cards right on this page. But at a time, we want to have only one card. And for that reason, we wrote width will be screen. But as you can see, they are like shrinked. To prevent that, we can write the following. We can say flex shrink will be 0. So if we save now, as you can see, each card has the whole screen. So now let's write a background color. Okay, and for each card, it's different. Now let's add some styles for this image tag. Let's say that width will be 80%, height will be 60%, and object will be cover. And let's also add some border radius by saying rounded will be large. Now for this div, we can add the following styles. We can say padding will be 4 and text will be center. Now for this title, we can add the following styles. We can say that text will be XL and font will be semi-bold. For this description, we can say that text will be gray 600 and text will be large. And for this view project, we can say that, first of all, let's say that target will be blank. It means that if someone clicks this button, the page will be opened in a new tab. Okay, now let's add some classes. Let's say that background color will be black and text will be white. Let's add some margin top, but as you can see, nothing has changed because we need to write block because this tag by default is inline. So that's why this margin top didn't have any effect on that. Okay, so let's add some padding from top and bottom. Let's say that it will be rounded, large. And let's say that on hover, background color will be black, but with opacity. Okay. So now we can get rid of these scroll bars. For that, we need to open this index.css file. And here we need to say the following. So by writing this, we make scroll bars invisible on WebKit browsers. So let's save it. And they are gone. Okay. Now all we have to do is to work with this horizontal scroll component. We need to create some references. For example, this div is responsible for having and displaying these cards. And when we are on this card, which is inside this div, we will try to scroll. So we need to make a reference to this div. And this div will be a motion div. So let's first of all import motion. And let's turn this div into a motion div. Okay, so now let's create a reference by saying container ref. And we need to use a ref hook, and by default it will be null. So now, as you can see, I have some issue because I didn't import useRef. So let's make sure that we import it, and now the problem is gone. So now to this div we can write reference and this container ref that we have created. Okay. So now we can work with container ref and do whatever we want. And the effect will be applied to this motion.div because its reference is this container, ref. Okay. Now we need to create one more reference for scrolling. So let's say const scrolling. And by default, it will be false. So this basically tells us if scrolling is happening. And we also need to write scroll velocity. So it will be for speed. So let's say use ref, and by default it will be at 0. And we also need to know the current active card. So to take care of that, we can create a state for that by saying is active, set is active. And for that we need to use state hook, and by default it will be at 0. So let's save it. So right now scrolling doesn't work, and we need to control whether mouse wheel movement is happening or not. So we need to detect it. So for that we can create a function called handle wheel. So let's do it. Here we can get access to the event object. So let's write E. It's like for event. So the first thing that I want to do is to write prevent default. So this stops normal up and down scrolling. And now we can adjust the scrolling speed by saying scroll velocity dot current plus and equal event dot delta, and we need to multiply it by 0.2. So this Y stands for direction of our wheel, because we're gonna do it from up and down. And now you may wonder why we have this current. So in React, useRef creates a mutable object that persists across renders. When we, for example, declare this statement, scrolling is not Boolean. Instead, it's an object with current property. So instead, it is like this. So by writing .current, we can change this value from false to true or from true to false. So that's why we write current. And later in this tutorial, there will be some moments where I will also write current, but now you already know why we write this current. And here in scroll velocity, it is also not just 0, but current, then colon, and then 0. Okay, I think it's clear. So now we adjust the speed, and now we can check if scrolling. So now we need to say if scrolling dot current. So if it's not true, and if we use this handle wheel when we use our mouse wheel, we need to make it to be true. So for that, I need to write scrolling dot current to be true. Okay. So now what we can do next is to create a function for smooth scrolling. So let's create a function for that. So let's say smooth scroll. And here, if scrolling is false, so if scrolling dot current, or if container ref dot current, so if one of these is false, then we just need to return it. So this checks if scrolling is not active or if the container reference is not set. Now we can do the following. We can say container ref dot current dot scroll left plus and equal scroll velocity dot current. So this updates the horizontal scroll position of the container. So scroll left is a property that represents the number of pixels the container is scrolled horizontally. And scroll velocity dot current is the speed at which the container scrolls. So it's updated based on the user's scroll input. Now we can say the following. We can say scroll velocity dot current. We can say multiply and equal 0.9. So this reduces the scroll velocity over time to create a deceleration effect. So in a nutshell, this makes the scroll feel smooth and natural. And now we can do the following: if math.apps. So as you can see, while we use this function, this returns the absolute value of a number, the value without regard to whether it is positive or negative. For example, the absolute value of -5 is the same as the absolute value of 5. So here we can say scroll velocity dot current if it is greater than 0.5. So if the velocity is still significant, greater than 0.5, the function calls itself again using request animation frame. So here we need to say request animation frame, and here we need to pass smooth scroll. Okay, else we can say that scrolling dot current will be equal to false. So let's save it. Now we need to create one more function, so let's do it. Let's say snap to closest. So this function ensures that the container snaps to the closest card after scrolling stops. So for that we can say if container ref.current. So if it is false, we just can return. If it happens, then this function exits early if the container reference is not set. And now we can create const container, and here we will refer to this container ref.current. Okay, so now we need to know the card width. For that we can say card width, and here we can say container dot scroll width, and we need to divide it by card's length. So by doing this, we calculate the width of each card by dividing the total scrollable width by the number of cards. Now we need to determine the index of the closest card based on the current scroll position. So for that we can say new index. Here we can say math.round. Here we can say container dot scroll left divided by card width. Okay, and now we need to update the active state. So we need to say set is active to this new index. Yeah, actually I think that here we just need to say active because it isn't a boolean value, right? We just need to say active and set active. Yeah, and here let's also say set active. And now the last but not least, we need to scroll the container to the closest card. So for that we need to say container dot scroll to, and here we need to say left property. It will be equal to this new index. We should multiply it by card width, and then we should set its behavior to be smooth. Okay, so now we need to create a use effect. So we need to add it for event listener, and the use effect hook will be used to add and clean up the wheel event listener. So let's do it. Its dependency will be empty array. And here, let's say const container. First, let's define our container. It will be container ref.current. Okay, if there is no container, if container is false, we can just exit by saying return. Then if there is a container, we can say add event listener. And here we need to write wheel because we do it for wheel. Here we need to pass our function called handle wheel. And we also need to write something like passive false. So we need this option to allow event.preventDefault to work. Okay, and now we need to clean up our function by saying return callback function. And here we need to say container dot remove event listener. And here we also need to pass wheel and the name of our function. Okay, so let's save it. So now we need to find our motion div, so here it is, and say on scroll. We need to find it, and here if scrolling.current false, then we want to write this snap to closest function. Okay, so let's save it, but we also need to make some changes here. So inside smooth scroll, we also need to use snap to closest function, right? And inside handle wheel, here we need to write request animation frame, and here we need to pass this smooth scroll. So let's save it. Okay, and now to be able to scroll for this motion div, we need to say that overflow will be auto, and for snapping we need to say snap will be horizontally, and we need to say snap mandatory. So let's save it. And now, as you can see, we can scroll. So as you can see, we have this kind of effect. So as you can see, each time, each card has its own width, its own place. So now, under this motion div, we can create one more div to show the number of the current card and how many cards are left, like how many cards are there in total. For that, we can say active +1, because as you remember, by default active is false. Oh, active is at 0. And now we can say of and cards length. So let's save it. Yes, I need to write it properly. It should be length. Okay. But now we don't see it because each card has the whole screen. So we need to say that its position will be absolute. It means that we need to find a relative parent. So it will be a relative parent. And now let's say that top will be 5, for example, and left will be 5. So as you can see, here we have our number. So let's add some styles to it. Let's say that background color will be black. Let's say that text will be white. Let's add some padding. Horizontally will be 4, vertically will be 2, and rounded will be large. Okay, so let's see how it looks on bigger screens. Yeah, I think that it's pretty cool. So maybe guys, the tutorial was a little overwhelming, but I think that you have understood everything. So if you have some questions, feel free to write them in the comments. I will do my best to answer them as soon as possible. Thanks for watching.